Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis. Sorry, Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph. 2 lines before the lines get wide. Our Gemara is speaking about the sprinkling of the dam that the Kohen Gadol does in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It brings 2 psukim. One pasuk is in regards to the Seir Chatos, and that it states that there is one sprinkling that is that is above, whereas there's another pasuk that talks about the sprinkling of the par, of the bull, and they're talking about 7 sprinklings lemato, which is lifnei. In both psukim it says the words me'al ulifnei, and the Gemara learned out until now that just like the extra lifnei in regards to the sir chatos, because we can learn out the downward 7 sprinkling from the par, comes to teach me that just as lifnei means before the aron, before the kaparos, the covering of the aron, the sprinkling is done, and therefore the dam does not land on the kaparos. So too, when it says al, when it refers to the above, the sprinkling above, that also does not then going to be sprinkled on the kaparis. Now the Gemara comes back and brings a braisu to explain how we learn out one from the other. In other words, that both the seir as well as the par learn out from the other ones. The seir learns out the 7 downward sprinklings from the par, and the par learns the upward single sprinkling from the seir. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanon, bring the following brisa. I want to quote you the pasuk in its entirety. This pasuk is referring to the seir. V'shochat es seir hachatos asher la'om, and the Kohen Gadol will shecht the seir chatos. V'hevi es domoy el mibeis laparoiches, and he will bring its blood to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Ve'oses domoy kasher oso ledam hapar, and it will do with the same blood as it did with it in the par, with the bull. Ve'hizo oisa al hakaporis v'lifnei hakaporis, and he will sprinkle the dam on the kaporis before the kaporis. And again, until now we proved that I was referring to both of them being before the kaporis, not touching, not on top of the kaporis. Of course, if dam does get onto the kaporis, it's not possible. But al kopanim, when he is mechavein, the sprinkling of the dam, the Kohen Gadol is mechavein that it should hit before the what's called in the brisa the oivel shel kaparis, the width or the thickness of the kaparis. Al kopanim, the Gemara now brings the brisa. Tanu Rabbanon, v'hiza oisoi ala kaparis v'lifnei kaparis, and he shall sprinkle the dam on the kaparis and before the kaparis. And again, they both refer to in front, not on the kaparis. Lamadnu kama lamala b'sir achas, lamato b'sir eini yodea kama. We learned out that in regards to the seir as being lamala, that's 1. How do we know, because that's explicit in the pasuk, how do we know how many sprinklings are for the seir down below? The Gemara brings the brisa that says following: Hareni dan. I can then explain with the following rationale. Nemru domim lamato bepar v'nemar domim lamata besoyer. It says in regard to the par, in regard to the sprinkling down below lamato, and it says in regard to the sprinkling of the seir above. Ma lamata bepar sheva, af lamata besoyer sheva. Just as the par has the downward sprinkling of 7. Therefore, we can learn out from the par to the seir that the seir's sprinkling is also 7 downwards. Oy kalach lederach zu, or the Brisa says perhaps you can go in the following way: Nemru damim lamala b'seir, v'nemar damim lamata basir. In regards to the seir, which it says explicitly that there's 1 above, maybe I'll learn out the below from the above, and therefore say the seir has requirement of only 1 sprinkling down below. Just as when sprinkling the sa'irs, the he-goat's blood, it's 1 above, so too it's 1 below. So we don't know which way to go. Explains the Brisa, Nira limidoime, that appears which one is therefore most similar. Danin mata mimata vein danin mata milmala. It's preferable achara to then dan, to then explain that we learn out mata from mata, just as the mata, the downward sprinkling from the par is 7, so too the downward sprinkling of the sa'ir, of the he-goat, should be 7. The Brisa challenges this itself. Adarabba, I can say it as far the other way. Danin gufoy mi gufoy. Ve'ein danin gufoy ma'alma. I can judge the sa'ir from the sa'ir, which is preferable than daving a sa'ir from the par. Since the sa'ir in the upper one is 1 of the sprinkling above, therefore I can learn out below for the sa'ir is 1 below. Talmud loymar ve'osa is damoy kasher osa ledam par. Therefore, the Brisa brings the pasuk, and this pasuk seems to be then superfluous. Why does the pasuk say ve'osa is damoy kasher osa ledam par? Hare, it already said in regards to the seir, it says me'al and velifnei. So we already know that there's applications above and below. Why does it then add these words? Ve'osa is damoy, and he shall perform its blood. Kasher also the dam par, the same way that it performs for the dam of the par. Says the Brisa, she'ein Talmud loymar kasher also, is not necessary to teach kasher also. Uma Talmud loymar kasher also. Why does it therefore teach it in the Torah? Sheyu kol asiyosav shavos, to teach me that the same things that are done by the par, namely the 7 sprinklings below, should be learned out to the seir for the 7 sprinklings of the seir below as well. Keshem shlamata bepar sheva. Now the Brisa goes in regards to learning to the par, in the same type of shakla v'tarya. Lamadnu kama lamata bepar ubesir sheva. We learned out how many is the par and the seir. That's 7. We just explained that the seir is learned out from the par, and since the par downward sprinkling is 7 times, so too the he-goat sprinkling is 7 times. The Brisa goes on to say, Lamala bepar eni yodeh kama. But how do I know how many upward sprinklings there in regards to the par? Now, in regards to the seir, it does say 1 time above, but in regards to the par, that it doesn't state. So the Brisa goes again through the same shakha v'tarya. Hare nidan. Nemar damin lamala b'sa'ir v'nemar damin lamala bepar. It says in regard to the damim in the upward motion by the seir. And it also says that there's a damim lamala bepar. Ma lamala beseir achas, af lamala bepar achas. So just as, therefore, the one sprinkling for the seir, which is mentioned explicitly in the verse, is above, so too I'll learn out from there that the par is also 1 time above. Oy kalach lederech zu. Or the Brisa is perhaps, I'll go in this way. Nemru damim lamata bepar, v'nemru damim lamala bepar. It says in regards to the par, damim lamata, which is 7 times. That's explicit in the verse. So let's learn out from there that the sprinkling of the dam of the par above will also be 7 times. Ma lamata bepar sheva, af lamala bepar sheva. The Brisa then goes on to say, Nire lemi doime. Let us see to which one is it similar. Danin mal mimala, vein dami mala lemamato. Let us learn out the most similar, which is above from above. Just as the above is going to be 1 time in the seir, so too the par should also be 1 time above, and not learn out from the seirs above from the seirs below. I'm sorry, the par. We're trying to learn to the par. Let's learn out mimala mimala. We'll learn out par is 1 time above, as the seir is 1 time above, and not learn out par is 7 times above because its downward sprinkling is 7 times below. The Gemara says, Adarabba. Let's learn out taka from the par itself. Danin gufa mi gufoy, vein danin gufa ma'alma. I have a svar to say that it's more mistaber to learn out the par from the par than the par from the soyer. Talmud loymar. Therefore, the Brisa brings the pasuk. The osa is domoy kasher osa, and he will perform its blood the way it was done. She'ein Talmud loymar kasher osa. L'char, it's superfluous. Ma Talmud loymar Kasher also, Shiu Kol Asiyois of Shavos, to teach me that the same thing that is done from one is done to the other. Keshem Shalamata Bepar Sheva, just as there are 7 springs down below for the par, Kach Lemata B'Seir Sheva, so too when it comes to the Seir, it's also 7 times below. Ukeshem Shalamala B'Seir Achas, Kach Lemala B'Par Achas, and just as the Seir has 1 time of a sprinkling above, so too the par we learn out from there is 1 time also above. The Gemara now quotes our Mishnah in the latter part of the Mishnah that the Kohen Gadol counts the sprinkling. When he goes Lemala, he says Achas, then he begins counting below and he says Achas ve'achas, Achas ve'shtayim, Achas ve'sholosh, and so on. The Gemara now brings a brisa saying there's a machlokes about how to do the counting. Tan Rabbanan, Achas, Achas ve'achas, Achas u'shtayim, Achas ve'sholosh, Achas ve'arbo, Achas ve'chamesh, Achas ve'shesh, Achas ve'sheva, Divrei Rabbi Meir. This is the Tana that we have in our Mishnah. The way we count Achas, and then go down below, Achas ve'achas, Achas ve'shtayim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Achas, Achas ve'achas, Shtayim ve'achas, Sholosh ve'achas, Arba ve'achas, Chamesh ve'achas, Sheish ve'achas, Sheva ve'achas. In other words, he puts the counting in the opposite order. And the Gemara points out, Veloy pligi, in fact, each way is acceptable. Both ways are kosher. So why does one count one way, like our Tana, that is Achas v'shtayim, Achas v'sholosh, and the way it's recorded over here, Rabbi Yehuda says it's Shtayim ve'achas v'sholosh ve'achas. Mar ki asrei, umar ki asrei. It depends on the people's, on their Tanas, the way the people in their locality, how they begin counting. When they count something, they'll count, let's say, 11, they'll do 10 and 1, and the other locale will say 1 and 10. So to over here, the one that is counting, according to our Tana, it's counting 1, Achas v'shtayim, 1 and 2, Achas v'sholosh, 1 and 3, and the one that the Rabbi Yehuda says is the opposite. Says the Gemara, the Kuliyama Miyaz Hazor Rishon Tzricha Minyan. But nevertheless, we do see that according to all opinions, that there's an additional counting. In other words, additional to count the 1 above, we now count for each one below an additional 1. Let's say according to our Tana, Achas v'shtayim, Achas v'sholosh. And the question is, my time I asked the Gemara, why do we add the Achas, which each count? Why not just go Achas lamala and then say Achas lamata, Shtayim, Sholosh, Arba, Chamesh? Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar Omar Sholoy Yite Behazois, as not to make a mistake with the amount of sprinkling. In other words, it's enabling him to then think between each sprinkling. The Achas in between allows him to then sam leiv, to then determine what is the next number. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Kro v'lifnei kaporis yazeh. Rabbi Yochanan has a different reason why he has to count 1 with each of the bottom sprinklings, because it says in the pasuk v'lifnei kaporis yazeh. Now the word yazeh lechara was already mentioned in the pasuk. Shein tamu lomar yazeh. So why does it have to say yazeh? Uma tamu yazeh. Why does it have to mention an additional sprinkling? Limeit, says Rabbi Yochanan, al hazor rishono shetzricha minyan im kol achas v'achas, to teach me that there has to be an additional counting with each one of the bottom of the downward sprinklings. My Beinai asked the Gemara, what is the distinction? What is the difference between the practical difference between the two opinions? Gemara explains, Ika Beinayu, Deloy mana veloy ta. If he did not count, but he's still accurate in his counting. So according to the first opinion of Rabbi Elazar, so that's going to be valid, because the whole purpose of counting was in order to then make sure that he's accurate. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's a Gzeres HaKosu requiring this detail that he says Achas with each and every count for the downward sprinkling. The Gemara now quotes the end of the Mishnah that says, Yatza v'hinichoi al kan hazov shebehecha. After the Kohen Gadol leaves the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he takes the blood that is in the Kli Shares, and he then places it on a kan, on a golden base. There, what's called in the Heichal, it's really in the Azora. and then he takes the second kli sharis with the afterwards he's going to take the dam of the sa'ir, which he's going to shecht, and he's going to have a second place to place that dam. So the Gemara points out that there's a machlokes about this. A Tanakama says that there's two different kans. However, Rabbi Yehuda argues, Tanan Hasam, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Lo hayu shofaros likine choiva mnei hataroivas. The Gemara brings from Masechet Shkolim that Rabbi Yehuda lachar is lishitasoi. Just like over here, he's concerned about having a second kan because you might make a mistake and mix them up. So too over there in regards to the shofaros. Shofaros are referring to the kupos. Those are the boxes that they would put money in for various donations, various things, various korbanos. And he says that Rabbi Yehuda had the opinion that they wouldn't put the shofaros of the kinei choiva b'bnei hataroivas. Now the kinei choiva is referring to the pair birds that were for an offering that would be a choiva, an obligatory offering. So he said they would not put the shofaros for that. Ask the Gemara, "My b'mnei hataroivas." What is the concern that he would not do that because of taroivas? The Gemara explains, since there are birds that are given for a nedava, and those voluntary offerings are always an oila, whereas the choiva, the obligatory, always requires a pair of birds of a chatas and an oila. So therefore, there may be a confusion that you might take the chatas for the oila or the oila for the chatos. Omer le Abai asked Abai, but why should that be a problem? L'char, you can solve the problem very easily. Na vitrei v'nichtav alayu hay de choiva v'hay de nedava. Make two different kupos, two different shofaros. One would be then labeled choiva, the other one labeled nedava, and therefore nobody would make a mistake. Rabbi Yehuda, less like siva. Gemara on Daf Hey Amud Beis says that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of labeling as a way to prevent a mistake from happening. Maybe a person, the kohen will then go ahead and not look at the label and go ahead and take from one kupa instead of the other. This nan, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer. Loy, and he brings up Raya from our Mishnah. Loy hayu hayasham elakain echad bilvad. Unlike the Tanakama that says in regards to the base, the golden base that the Kohen Gadol places the kli sharis with the blood in it. So Rabbi Yehuda argues that there's only one kan. Trey, my time Allah. Why does Rabbi Yehuda argue and say there's not two but only one? Mishun de michalefei, because he's concerned that you might come to then switch them and make a mistake from one blood to the other. Ask the Gemara, v'nave trei v'lichtev alayu hay de parva hay de tsoyer. Why don't we avoid such a problem by simply labeling it? This kan belongs to this base will belong to the par, and the other base will belong to the blood of the soyer. Elo Rabbi Yehuda less like ksiva. Rather, we see from over here that Rabbi Yehuda says that the ksiva, the labeling alone, is not sufficient because maybe the kohen, in this case the kohen gadol, will not pay attention to the label, and he'll anyway mix the two together. And therefore, instead of then having that problem, we'll have one kan shel zov, and therefore there'll never be a potentiality of mixing one blood and changing it for the other blood.